Every year, the supplement industry collects billions of dollars selling pills, powders, and kidney cleanse formulas to people who are genuinely frightened about what their blood tests are telling them. Creatinine climbing, GFR dropping, the doctor's voice getting quieter and more serious. And somewhere in that fear, people forget something the ancient world never forgot, that the most powerful medicines on earth grow in soil, not in laboratories. Hippocrates, writing in the 5th century before the Common Era, made a statement that modern nephrology is only beginning to fully appreciate. He said, "Let food be thy medicine." He was not speaking abstractly. He was describing a clinical reality that physicians from Mesopotamia to ancient China had already spent centuries documenting, that certain plants, eaten in specific ways, could quiet the body's fire, ease the burden on its filters, and extend the years of a life. Today we are going to look at 13 vegetables and how they were understood by the ancient world long before creatinine was a word anyone knew. Stay with me until the end, because number 1 will surprise you. Most people have it in their kitchen right now and treat it like a garnish. And when we reach number 7, I am going to share a story from the oldest agricultural text in human history, about a people who survived in the harshest conditions on Earth, eating a specific combination of plants that modern renal nutrition is only now beginning to understand. Number 13. Red cabbage. In the Hebrew Scriptures, the Book of Numbers records that the Israelites wandering in the desert remembered with longing the vegetables of Egypt, specifically cucumbers, melon, laix, onions, and garlic. What does not appear in that verse is wild brassica, the family of plants from which cabbage descends. But brassica cultivation in the ancient Near East predates the Common Era by at least 4,000 years. And Egyptian agricultural records from the Middle Kingdom period document the cultivation of leafy brassica plants as a staple food for laborers building the great structures of that civilization. These were not royalty foods. They were the food of people who needed to sustain hard physical labor without the luxury of expensive ingredients. The ancient Greeks consumed a form of wild cabbage they called crombe, Pythagoras, who was deeply invested in the relationship between diet and mental clarity, reportedly considered it a food that kept the mind steady and the body calm. Roman medical writers, including Cato the Elder, wrote entire chapters on cabbage's healing properties, particularly its ability to reduce swelling in the body and support urination. In traditional Chinese medicine, brassica vegetables appear in texts from the Han Dynasty as foods that cool internal heat and move fluid through the body. Modern nutritional research has since identified the compounds behind these observations. Red cabbage is rich in anthocyanins, the same class of pigment molecules that give blueberries their color, with concentrations that recent analyses have measured at up to 9 times higher than green cabbage. Anthocyanins belong to the flavonoid family and have demonstrated, in multiple laboratory and animal studies, the ability to reduce markers of inflammation and oxidative stress in renal tissue. A 2019 study published in the journal Nutrients found that anthocyanin supplementation was associated with a measurable reduction in kidney fibrosis markers in animal models with induced chronic kidney disease. Red cabbage also contains indole 3-carbinol, a compound formed when brassica vegetables are chopped or chewed, which early research has connected to reduced inflammatory signaling in kidney tissue. Crucially, a half cup of raw red cabbage contains roughly 75 milligrams of potassium, a level so modest that even patients on strict renal potassium restrictions can typically include it without difficulty. Slice it paper thin on a mandoline if you have one. Dress it with a tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil and a squeeze of fresh lemon. The acid from lemon actually intensifies the anthocyanin stability, and eat it raw as a base for meals. 2 or 3 times each week. Do not boil it. The moment that vivid purple fades to gray-blue in the pot, you are watching the anthocyanins degrade in real time. The Roman physicians who recommended cabbage for swelling had no concept of anthocyanins or inflammatory cytokines. They had something equally powerful: generations of careful observation, The research is now beginning to examine why they were right. Number 12. Cauliflower. In the Talmudic agricultural tradition, white vegetables held a specific place in the hierarchy of healing foods. Rabbinic texts from the 2nd and 3rd centuries of the Common Era discuss the concept of maison-nourishing food and single out pale, mild vegetables, as particularly suitable for the ill and the elderly, because they placed the least burden on a body already under strain. Cauliflower in its modern cultivated form was not yet that vegetable that development would come later, in the gardens of the Ottoman Empire, but the principle was deeply established, mild, white, unstimulating vegetables belonged in the diet of the person whose body needed rest, not challenge. The Ottoman agricultural tradition, drawing from Persian medical knowledge, was the first to cultivate what we now recognize as cauliflower. And Arab physicians of the medieval period wrote specifically about white brassica's suitability for those with kidney complaints, noting that it passed through the body without creating the heaviness they associated with other vegetables. The Arabic medical encyclopedias of Ibn Sina, writing in the early 11th century, specifically distinguish between vegetables that burden the urinary system and those that ease it. From a modern biochemical perspective, cauliflower occupies a remarkable nutritional position. A full cup of cooked cauliflower contains approximately 176 milligrams of potassium, roughly half the potassium load of the same volume of cooked broccoli, and dramatically less than the potassium in spinach, potatoes, or most legumes. It also contains approximately 40 milligrams of phosphorus per cup, a figure that allows it to fit comfortably into renal diets, at the stage where phosphorus management becomes critical. But the compound that has drawn more recent scientific interest is sulforaphane, a glucosinolate breakdown product that forms when cauliflower is chewed or chopped. A study published in the Journal of the American Society of Nephrology found that sulforaphane activated the NRF2 pathway in kidney cells, a molecular pathway that essentially switches on the kidney cell's own antioxidant defense system. The research team noted this was particularly relevant for patients with diabetic nephropathy, one of the most common drivers of kidney decline in adults over 60. Steam it gently, no more than 5 minutes, until it yields to a fork but retains its shape. Mash it with a tablespoon of olive oil, half a clove of fresh garlic, and a grind of black pepper. The result is something so texturally close to mashed potatoes that most people, tasting it without being told, cannot immediately distinguish the two. But the potassium load is dramatically lower. Ibn Sina did not have a laboratory. He had patience, outcomes, and centuries of accumulated Persian medical wisdom. The sulforaphane studies are beginning to provide the molecular explanation for what he and his colleagues observed 1,000 years ago. Number 11. Garlic. There is perhaps no plant in the entire Hebrew Bible that appears with more specificity and reverence than garlic. When the Israelites lament in Numbers chapter 11, we remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost, also the cucumbers, melon, laix, onions, and garlic. They are not listing luxuries. They are listing medical staples in ancient Egypt. Archaeological excavations of workers' villages at Giza uncovered vast quantities of garlic remnants. And ancient texts record that garlic was included in the daily rations of laborers because it was understood to maintain strength, prevent disease, and protect against what ancient physicians called putrefaction in the blood. The Vedic tradition, codified in the Karaka Samhita, one of the foundational Ayurvedic texts, dated to roughly 600 BCE, describes garlic as a rasayana, a rejuvenative substance that maintains the vitality of bodily tissues. The text specifically recommends garlic in conditions of swelling and difficult urination. Chinese medical texts from the Han Dynasty similarly identify garlic as a substance that moves blood, disperse stagnation, and supports the water passages of the body language that maps with striking precision onto what modern research describes as improved blood flow and mild diuretic effect. Allicin formed when garlic cells are crushed and the enzyme allinase is released to act on a compound called allicin, is among the most studied phytochemicals in nutritional medicine. What is less widely known is that allicin is extremely unstable under heat. At temperatures above 140 degrees Fahrenheit, allicin degrades rapidly. This is why the ancient practice documented in both Ayurvedic texts and traditional Chinese medicine of crushing or pounding garlic and allowing it to rest before consuming it in a minimally heated form was not culinary preference. It was a medicinal strategy, crushing garlic and allowing it to sit for 10 minutes before adding it to a pan, then adding it at the end of cooking rather than the beginning. Preserves significantly more allicin than simply dropping a whole clove into hot oil. Studies suggest that allicin and its metabolites have measurable effects on blood pressure regulation, specifically through inhibition of angiotensin-converting enzyme, the same pathway targeted by one of the most commonly prescribed classes of blood pressure medications, and blood pressure is the single most damaging chronic force on the kidney's intricate capillary network. 1 to 2 fresh crushed cloves per day, added to food late in the cooking process, represents a preparation method that has been used therapeutically for more than 3,000 years. It is also the preparation most likely to deliver the active compound the ancient physicians were seeking, even if they described it in entirely different language. What the healers of ancient Egypt observed in daily practice, allicin pharmacology is only now providing the molecular explanation for. They had thousands of years of observation. We now have the mechanism. Both point to the same conclusion. Number 10. Red bell pepper. The capsicum family arrived in the Old World from the Americas in the 16th century, so it carries no ancient, Near Eastern scriptural history. But within decades of its arrival in the Mediterranean, physicians of the Ottoman Empire and the Persian tradition were documenting its properties with the same careful language they had applied to plants they had known for centuries. The Flemish physician Dodoens, writing in 1554, described sweet red pepper as a food that warmed the blood and cleared the passages of the body without irritating them, a distinction that even then contemporary observers recognized as significant compared to the hotter varieties. What the 16th century physicians were intuiting, modern nutritional biochemistry has quantified. Red bell pepper contains higher concentrations of vitamin C than virtually any other commonly consumed vegetable, approximately 190 milligrams per cup of raw slices, compared to roughly 52 milligrams in the same volume of broccoli, and far exceeding oranges by weight. The critical detail for kidney health is the form of this vitamin C, whole food ascorbic acid, embedded in a matrix of bioflavonoids, rather than isolated supplemental ascorbate. The clinical studies associating high-dose supplemental vitamin C with increased oxalate production and kidney stone risk do not apply with the same force to whole food sources where the bioflavonoid matrix moderates absorption kinetics. Red bell pepper also contains luteolin and quercetin, 2 flavonoids that have demonstrated in laboratory studies the ability to inhibit NF-κB, a central signaling molecule in the inflammatory cascade that contributes to kidney fibrosis over time. And its potassium content, approximately 314 milligrams per cup, is manageable for most people at early to moderate stages of kidney decline. Compare this to a medium tomato, which contains approximately 290 milligrams in a much smaller volume with significantly more concentrated natural acids. Eat it raw. Slice half a red bell pepper and arrange it alongside your meal as you would crackers or bread. The crunch is satisfying. The sweetness replaces the need for condiments, and the vitamin C survives intact because heat, above 170 degrees Fahrenheit, accelerates ascorbic acid oxidation significantly. Lightly stir-fried is acceptable. Roasted until soft and collapsed is nutritionally a different food. The physicians of the Ottoman Golden Age recognized something in this new fruit from the Americas that aligned with principles they had spent centuries developing. The antioxidant science is now naming what they tasted and described. Number 9. Asparagus. In the ancient world, asparagus was not a side dish. It was medicine. The Egyptians cultivated asparagus as early as 3000 BCE, and images of asparagus bundles have been found in ancient Egyptian tombs, not as food offerings, but as medicinal offerings. The Greek physician Dioscorides, writing in the 1st century CE, in his encyclopedic work, De Materia Medica, which remained the primary reference in European and Islamic medicine for more than 1500 years, described asparagus as a diuretic, and listed it specifically for conditions involving painful urination and kidney inflammation. He described preparation as a decoction of the roots, drunk in the morning. Ayurvedic medicine has its own name for asparagus. Racemosus shatavari and the Karaka Samhita classifies it among the most important rasayana herbs for maintaining the health of tissues involved in filtration and fluid regulation. In traditional Chinese medicine, asparagus root has been used for over 2,000 years for what practitioners described as tonifying the kidney yin, the concept that corresponds, in modern physiological language, to maintaining the functional reserve of filtering tissue. The compound responsible for asparagus's distinctive urinary effect, asparagusic acid, is converted during digestion into several volatile sulfur-containing metabolites that are excreted through the kidneys. This is why urine may smell different after consuming asparagus in some people. It is not a sign of kidney distress. It is, in fact, direct evidence that the kidneys are efficiently processing and excreting metabolic compounds, which is precisely what healthy kidney function looks like. Asparagus also contains glutathione, described in cellular biochemistry as the body's master antioxidant, a tripeptide that kidneys actually produce and depend upon to neutralize the oxidative byproducts of their own filtration work. Studies suggest that dietary sources of glutathione precursors, including asparagus, avocado, and spinach, may support the kidney's internal antioxidant reserves, though direct clinical evidence in humans remains an active area of research. Asparagus additionally contains rutin, a bioflavonoid that laboratory studies have associated with reduction in kidney stone crystal formation in animal models. Steam it for 4 minutes. Sauté it for 3 minutes in olive oil with 2 crushed garlic cloves. Roast it at 400 degrees Fahrenheit for 10 minutes. It should bend but not collapse. Mushy asparagus has lost most of what made it worth eating. Dioscorides prescribed asparagus for the kidneys 16 centuries before nephrology existed as a medical discipline. The glutathione and rutin research is providing the molecular vocabulary for an observation he made with nothing but careful eyes and a commitment to recording what actually worked. Number 8. Leeks. In Numbers chapter 11, in the very same verse where garlic and onions are mourned by the wandering Israelites, leeks appear. The Hebrew word is shatzir. The Israelites in that verse were not expressing nostalgic preference for Egyptian cuisine. They were expressing the loss of a medical diet, the set of plants that their communities had used for centuries to maintain health in a population doing hard labor in a hot climate. The specificity of the list is remarkable. Each plant named in that verse corresponds, in modern nutritional research, to a compound class associated with anti-inflammatory or blood pressure modulating effects. In ancient Rome, the Emperor Nero reportedly consumed leeks daily, believing they preserved the voice. And Roman physicians who treated the gladiators of Capua noted leeks among the foods given to athletes recovering from injury and exertion. The Persian medical tradition, through Ibn Sina's Canon of Medicine, specifically lists leeks among vegetables that promote urine flow and reduce heaviness in the kidneys. Leeks contain campherol, a flavonoid that has demonstrated, in cell culture and animal studies, the ability to protect kidney tubule cells from oxidative damage. The kidney's tubules, the long winding tubes that reabsorb water and useful compounds back from filtered fluid, are among the most metabolically active cells in the body, and consequently among the most vulnerable to oxidative stress. Campherol's mechanism in protecting these cells involves upregulation of superoxide dismutase, one of the kidney's primary enzymatic antioxidant defenses. Leeks also contain the prebiotic fiber fructooligosaccharides, the same class of fiber found in garlic and onions, which feeds beneficial gut bacteria associated in emerging research with reduced uremic toxin production. This is significant because uremic toxins, compounds like indoxyl sulfate and p-cresyl sulfate, produced by gut bacteria from protein fermentation, are increasingly recognized as direct contributors to kidney damage progression. A diet that feeds the right gut bacteria may reduce the production of these compounds at the source. Slice the white and pale green sections thin. Wash thoroughly between the layers where soil lodges, and sauté gently in olive oil over medium-low heat until softened but not browned, approximately 8 minutes. Add to soups in the final 5 minutes of cooking. Use as the flavor base for any dish where you would otherwise use onion. Their potassium content of approximately 108 milligrams per half cup of cooked leek is among the most kidney-accessible of all allium vegetables. Nero's court physicians could not have known about camphoral or uremic toxin pathways. They observed that leeks were good for the body of a person under strain. The molecular mechanisms are now providing the explanation for that observation, 12 centuries late. Number 7. Cabbage green. There is a moment in the book of Daniel, one of the most medically specific passages in all of Scripture, that deserves to be read with the eyes of a nutritionist. Daniel and his 3 companions have been selected for training in the court of King Nebuchadnezzar. They are offered the royal food and wine-rich meats, concentrated proteins, heavily salted court provisions. Daniel refuses. He asks instead for pulse, the Hebrew word zeruim, meaning vegetables and legumes and water. The court official is afraid because he fears they will look worse than the other young men and he will be blamed. Daniel proposes a 10-day test. Eat only vegetables and water. Then look at us and compare. The text records what happened at the end of 10 days. Daniel and his companions appeared healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. Modern readers often read this as a faith story, but read it as a clinical observation. A group of young men eating rich court food high in animal protein, concentrated sodium, processed preparations against a group eating vegetables and water. 10 days. Measurable physical difference in their appearance. Noted by observers, with no reason to favor the outcome. Daniel predicted, among the vegetables most available and most consumed in Babylonian captivity, documented in cuneiform agricultural records from the Neo-Babylonian period, was brassica, cabbage, in its ancient form, a food that the captive communities of Judea would have eaten in Egypt, in the desert, and carried with them as seeds and knowledge into Babylon. Green cabbage contains sinigrin, a glucosinolate that breaks down during digestion into allyl isothiocyanate, a compound that has demonstrated in laboratory studies the ability to suppress inflammatory signaling in macrophages, the immune cells most involved in driving the chronic kidney inflammation that researchers now identify as a major contributor to GFR decline. It also contains indole 3-carbinol, the same compound found in red cabbage, but green cabbage has the additional advantage of tartaric acid, an organic acid that slows glucose absorption from the digestive tract, moderating the blood sugar spikes that, over years, damage the kidney's filtration apparatus. A half cup of cooked green cabbage contains approximately 73 milligrams of potassium, among the lowest of any cooked vegetable, that provides meaningful nutritional content. Boil it gently for no more than 5 minutes. Or, steam it until just tender. Add to soups. Use the large leaves as wraps, instead of wheat tortillas. Dress with a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar, which, unlike salt, enhances flavor while potentially supporting the slightly acidic internal environment that helps slow the progression of kidney decline in patients with metabolic acidosis. Daniel's court observer did not know about sinigrin or tartaric acid or inflammatory macrophage signaling. He knew what he could see. And what he saw, after 10 days of vegetables and water, was health he could not argue with. If what you're hearing is resonating with you, the idea that ancient wisdom and modern science are pointing toward the same answers, please hit the like button and subscribe. What's coming next goes even deeper. Number 6. Onion. The onion appears in that same morning verse in Numbers alongside garlic, leeks, and cucumbers, not by accident. These plants were dietary staples across the entire ancient Near Eastern medical tradition, and their co-occurrence in texts from Egypt, Mesopotamia, Persia, India, and China reflects an observation that took thousands of years and dozens of independent civilizations to confirm that the allium family of plants possesses therapeutic properties distinct from virtually any other plant family. The Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest surviving medical documents, dated to approximately 1550 BCE, contains more than 20 prescriptions involving onion, including specific formulations for conditions described as painful or difficult urination and swelling of the lower body. Ancient Babylonian clay tablets from the same period list onion among the ingredients, in preparations given to patients whose urine was described as scanty or discolored. Quercetin, the flavonoid that concentrates most heavily in the outer layers of onion and in the papery skin, is per unit weight. Among the most potent natural inhibitors of xanthine oxidase, identified in nutritional biochemistry, xanthine oxidase is the enzyme responsible for converting purines into uric acid in the body. Elevated uric acid is directly associated with kidney stone formation, tubular injury, and a specific pattern of kidney decline that researchers now call uric acid nephropathy. The outer layers of the onion, the parts most people remove and discard, contain quercetin concentrations that are 4 to 5 times higher than the inner flesh. If you make broth, use the whole onion, including the papery skin. Quercetin is water-soluble and will migrate into the broth during long cooking. Strain the solids, but keep the liquid. You have extracted something the ancient world was consuming in exactly this way, boiled whole alliums in water for thousands of years. Without knowing the name of the compound, they were concentrating. One medium yellow onion contains approximately 190 milligrams of potassium, manageable for most people at early to moderate stages of kidney disease. Sauté in olive oil over low heat for 15 minutes until deeply golden. This caramelization process actually increases quercetin bioavailability by breaking down the cell walls that otherwise limit absorption. The physicians of ancient Babylon recorded onion for difficult urination without knowing xanthine oxidase existed. The modern biochemistry of quercetin is providing the mechanism for a clinical observation that is 3,500 years old. Number 5. Beets leafy greens. This is where a critical distinction must be made, one that most discussions of kidney health and beets entirely miss, and that represents exactly the kind of counterintuitive knowledge worth knowing. The beetroot, the familiar dark red bulb, is high in oxalates and requires caution for people prone to kidney stones or with advancing kidney disease. But beet greens, the leafy tops that virtually every grocery store in the world discards, contain a fundamentally different nutritional profile from the root, and they are mentioned in a context of deep biblical resonance. In the Talmudic tradition, the plant known as selek, understood by rabbinic scholars to refer to a beet-like plant, is mentioned in Tractate Barakat as a food that is good for the heart and good for the eyes. In ancient Mediterranean tradition, beet greens were the portion most prized by physicians, not the root. In the Roman agricultural tradition, Apicius, whose cookbook represents the oldest surviving culinary text in the Western tradition, recommended beet greens specifically as a preparation for the convalescent, noting that the leaves were lighter and more easily processed by the body than the root. Beet greens contain betalains, the same pigment compounds found in the root, but in a water-soluble form, distributed through the leaf tissue rather than concentrated in the dense root flesh. They also contain a significant quantity of nitrates, not the synthetic nitrates found in processed meats, but naturally occurring inorganic nitrates that the body converts to nitric oxide, a molecule essential to blood vessel dilation and blood pressure regulation. A study published in Hypertension found that dietary nitrate supplementation was associated with a measurable reduction in systolic blood pressure. Beet greens provide these nitrates in a potassium per serving ratio that is significantly more moderate than the root. They also contain lutein and zeaxanthin carotenoids associated with protection of small blood vessels, including the capillaries that form the kidney's filtration apparatus. Sauté beet greens with 1 crushed garlic clove in a tablespoon of olive oil over medium heat for 3 to 4 minutes. They wilt like spinach, but have less oxalate than spinach. Dress with lemon. Eat warm. Ask your grocer to keep the greens attached when you buy beets. Or ask for the trimmed greens. Directly, they are typically composted or discarded, which means you are being offered the part the ancient world valued most. For nothing. The part everyone discards is often where the medicine concentrates. The ancient physicians who valued the celiac leaf over the root were observing something the modern grocery store has chosen to throw away. Number 4. Fennel. Fennel is mentioned in Ayurvedic texts as one of the tridoshic spices, meaning the rare category of plants considered beneficial, regardless of an individual's constitutional type. A category reserved for ingredients that the tradition considered safe and supportive in virtually all conditions. The Karaka Samhita specifically includes fennel seed and fennel bulb in preparations for conditions involving kidney heaviness and difficult urination. In ancient Egypt, fennel seeds were found in the tomb of Tutankhamun not as food, but among the medical provisions, consistent with their documented use in Egyptian papyri for urinary complaints and bloating. Greek athletes consumed fennel before competitions because ancient physicians observed that it promoted clean urination and reduced the heaviness associated with exertion. The compound most relevant to kidney health in fennel is anethole, the molecule responsible for fennel's distinctive anise-like aroma. Anethole has demonstrated in animal studies the ability to reduce inflammatory cytokine production, specifically TNF, alpha, and IL-6. Two of the inflammatory signals most consistently elevated in patients with chronic kidney disease. Fennel bulb also contains potassium in a form accompanied by significant concentrations of quercetin and rutin, the same flavonoids associated with xanthine oxidase inhibition, in onion at a total potassium level of approximately 360 milligrams per cup, which is moderate and manageable for most patients at early stages of decline. The fennel fronds, the feathery green tops that most people remove and discard, contain concentrations of antioxidant compounds that exceed those in the bulb by several times. They can be used exactly as one would use fresh dill or parsley. Thinly slice raw fennel bulb and dress with lemon and olive oil. The acid of the lemon reacts with the anethole to create a gentler flavor while preserving the compound's stability. Or roast the bulb at 375 degrees Fahrenheit for 25 minutes until the edges caramelize. Anethole is relatively heat-stable compared to vitamin C. Surviving light. Cooking without significant degradation. The ancient physicians who placed fennel in Pharaoh's tomb alongside medicinal preparations were documenting clinical observation across a span of time longer than Western medicine has existed. The anethole research is providing the molecular vocabulary for what they recorded in hieroglyphics. Number 3. Turnip greens. In the agricultural traditions of ancient Israel, the turnip was among the most commonly cultivated root vegetables available to ordinary people, inexpensive, storable through the dry season, and documented in rabbinic texts as one of the acceptable foods in the sabbatical year when the land was to rest and communities lived on stored provisions. But it is the greens again, the part most commonly discarded in modern food preparation, that carry the greatest pharmacological significance for kidney health. The Cherokee Nation of North America, whose traditional pharmacopoeia was compiled by ethnobotanists in the late 19th century, lists turnip greens among the plants used for kidney and bladder health, a striking cross-cultural convergence with Mediterranean medical tradition. Given that the two traditions developed entirely independently across an ocean, turnip greens contain glucosinolates, similar to those found in cabbage, but their most remarkable property from a kidney perspective is their exceptionally low potassium to nutritional value ratio, combined with their high calcium content. A half cup of cooked turnip greens contains approximately 146 milligrams of potassium, lower than nearly any other dark leafy green vegetable, while providing significant concentrations of calcium, vitamin K, and a set of bitter compounds, including gluconopin, that have demonstrated in laboratory studies the ability to upregulate detoxification enzymes in kidney cells. They also contain alpha-lipoic acid, an endogenous antioxidant that the body produces in small quantities, but whose dietary supplementation has been studied specifically in diabetic nephropathy patients, with results researchers describe as warranting continued investigation. Boil turnip greens gently for 5 minutes. This brief boiling actually reduces their oxalate content slightly compared to eating them raw. Unlike with cabbage, where minimal cooking is preferable, discard the cooking water If potassium management is critical, dress with a small amount of apple cider vinegar and black pepper. Two entirely separate civilizations, on opposite sides of the planet, arrived at the same green for the same organ. The molecular biology of gluconopin and alpha-lipoic acid is now providing the shared explanation for what Cherokee healers and Talmudic agricultural wisdom both observed. Number 2. Watercress. There is a passage in the Gospel of John, chapter 5, that describes the pool of Bethesda in Jerusalem, where the sick gathered in the belief that the moving water held healing power. What most modern readers do not know is that archaeological and botanical surveys of the Bethesda site have documented that the spring that fed that pool was surrounded by dense growth of Nasturtium officinale watercress, which thrives in exactly the kind of moving spring water described in the text. The people who gathered at that pool were almost certainly harvesting and consuming watercress. What they understood as the healing property of the water may have been, in part, the medicinal properties of the plant growing at the water's edge. Watercress appears in the Hippocratic texts as a plant that clears the kidneys and lightens the blood. Persian medical texts from the 10th century identify it as a vegetable for people with kidney heaviness and cloudy urine. And in traditional Chinese medicine, watercress, known as shi yang chai, is classified as a food that clears heat from the kidney meridian. Watercress contains phenylethyl isothiocyanate, PEITC, a compound that has attracted significant research attention because it is among the most potent natural activators of the NRF2 pathway identified to date. The NRF2 pathway is essentially the master switch for the cell's own antioxidant and detoxification systems. When activated, it upregulates production of glutathione, superoxide dismutase, and catalase simultaneously. A clinical study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that regular consumption of watercress was associated with measurable reduction in DNA oxidative damage markers in healthy adults for kidney cells, which process the body's metabolic waste continuously and are consequently exposed to higher concentrations of reactive oxygen species than almost any other tissue. NRF2 activation represents a particularly meaningful form of protection. Watercress also contains iodine at trace levels, sufficient to support thyroid function significant, because hypothyroidism is both underdiagnosed in adults over 60 and independently associated with worsening kidney function. 1 cup of raw watercress contains approximately 112 milligrams of potassium, making it among the lowest potassium leafy greens available. Eat watercress raw. Add it to salads. Use it as a bed beneath lightly cooked fish. Place it in sandwiches instead of lettuce. It has a peppery bitterness that fades within minutes of cutting, so prepare it immediately before eating. Do not cook it. High heat converts PEITC into less bioactive forms within seconds. The people who gathered at the pool of Bethesda knew that something at that water's edge was worth seeking. 3 separate medical traditions from 3 different cultures independently confirmed the same observation. The PEITC research is now providing the molecular explanation for what they were all seeing. Number 1. Arugula rocket. Of all the plants on this list, arugula, known in the ancient world as eruca, holds perhaps the most consistently documented medical history across the widest range of ancient traditions. And it is the plant that most people today treat as nothing more than a bitter salad green that adds visual interest to a restaurant plate. The Roman agricultural writer, Pliny the Elder, in his Natural History, written in the 1st century CE, describes eruca as an aphrodisiac, but significantly also as a plant consumed by temple priests because it was believed to support the urinary passages and protect the digestion. The Ebers Papyrus, the Egyptian medical document from 1550 BCE, includes eruca among urinary preparations. The Talmud mentions eruca in the context of foods appropriate for persons in physical recovery, and Ibn Sina, in the Canon of Medicine, includes it among vegetables that cleanse the kidney passages, while also warning in a detail that demonstrates the sophistication of medieval Persian clinical observation that it should not be consumed in excess by people with kidney heat, meaning what modern medicine might describe as inflammatory kidney conditions. In Ayurveda, the plant equivalent, Aruca sativa, is used in preparations for what the tradition calls mutra, painful or difficult urination, at doses and preparations, remarkably consistent with modern pharmacological knowledge about its active compounds. The same plant, identified by the same properties, documented by physicians working independently in Egypt, Homi, the Hebrew rabbinic tradition, Persian Islam, and India, across 2,500 years of separate medical development. What the ancient world was responding to, without knowing why, are two compounds now extensively studied in arugula, erusin and indole. 3. Carbinol. Erusin is a glucosinolate metabolite with demonstrated NF-κB inhibitory activity, meaning it directly suppresses one of the central inflammatory signaling pathways implicated in kidney fibrosis and decline. Indole. 3. Carbinol, which concentrates most heavily in arugula at nearly twice the concentration found in broccoli or cabbage, has shown in peer-reviewed laboratory research the ability to reduce oxidative damage in kidney tubule cells. Specifically, arugula also contains exceptionally high concentrations of dietary nitrates, comparable to beet greens, which convert to nitric oxide in the body and support the dilation of the tiny arterioles that supply the kidney's filtration units per gram of potassium consumed. Arugula provides more of these anti-inflammatory and vasoprotective compounds than virtually any other commonly available leafy green. 1 cup of raw arugula contains approximately 74 milligrams of potassium, a quantity that is, for most people, at any stage of kidney health, entirely accessible. Eat it raw. Dress it with nothing but extra virgin olive oil and lemon juice. The oleocanthal in the olive oil adds its own NF-κB inhibitory effect synergistically. Do not heat arugula. Do not blend it into a smoothie. The erusin and the dietary nitrates are both destroyed or altered by heat and by the oxidation that occurs in a blender. Place it on the plate. Pour olive oil and lemon over it. Eat it immediately. That preparation oil, acid. Fresh leaf is precisely how it was consumed in Roman and Persian tradition. And it is also, not coincidentally, the preparation most likely to preserve the bioactive compounds that give it its clinical value. 2,500 years of independent medical documentation across 5 civilizations that had no contact with each other, all arriving at the same bitter leafy green for the same organ. The erusin and indole. 3. Carbinol research is providing the molecular vocabulary for an observation that has been made and repeatedly confirmed for longer than written history. A final principle and a question that will stay with you. There is something that connects every vegetable on this list, a principle that modern food processing has worked systematically to eliminate, and that ancient food preparation instinctively preserved. Every active compound we have discussed, the anthocyanins in red cabbage, the sulforaphane in cauliflower, the allicin in garlic, the quercetin in onion skins, the erusin in arugula, the PEITC in watercress, the anethole in fennel is destroyed, denatured, or dramatically reduced by one of the following: high heat, industrial processing, oxidation, or the stripping away of the outer layers where these compounds concentrate most heavily. Every ancient preparation method intuitively protected these compounds, raw or lightly cooked, whole, including the skins, freshly crushed, eaten immediately, dressed with acid vinegar or lemon, which stabilizes certain flavonoids and slows oxidation. The single most important thing you can do for the kidney protective value of every vegetable on this list is to minimize the distance between the plant and your plate, the less it has been processed, heated, canned, blended, or stripped of its outer layers. The more of what the ancient physicians were seeking will still be present when it reaches your kidney cells. This principle, that what is closest to the natural form is closest to the therapeutic form, is not traditional wisdom that modern science has failed to confirm. It is traditional wisdom that modern science is confirming. Compound by compound, study by study. And here is the question worth sitting with. If 5 completely separate medical traditions, working independently across thousands of years, arrived at the same plants for the same organ. Using the same preparation methods, what does that pattern of convergence actually tell us about the nature of knowledge itself? If this video gave you something genuinely new to think about, not just what to eat, but how the ancient world arrived at these answers and why their methods still hold, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Share it with a family member. Share it with a friend who just received a concerning blood test. They may be looking for exactly this kind of perspective. Subscribe so you don't miss what we explore next. And leave a comment. Which of these vegetables were you already eating, and which one surprised you most? I read everything. Your kidneys have been working without complaint for your entire life. The least we can offer them is one better choice today. That is all it takes to begin. This video is for educational and informational purposes only, and does not constitute medical or nutritional advice. Please consult a qualified healthcare provider before making significant changes to your diet, especially if you have existing health conditions or take medications.